So we've got two wonderful speakers for you tonight. George Monk Jr. George serves on the Mid-Atlantic United Methodist Foundation Stewardship Committee. He's a trustee and the financial secretary at Chevy Chase United Methodist Church, and also serves as administrative officer of the Chevy Chase Fire Department in Chevy Chase, Maryland. He spent 36 years in the financial services sector, including 25 years in New York City with the Depository Trust Company and J.P. Morgan Chase. George received his BA in economics from Wake Forest University and an MBA in strategic management from Pace University. And that's George Monk. And our other featured speaker this evening, which everybody probably knows, James P. Brown, has been serving as the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference Treasurer since 2017. He was the controller from 2010 to 2017. He was previously employed as the finance director for the Latin American Community Center in Wilmington, Delaware, as a financial systems consultant for Gunnup and Company in Wilmington, and as the comptroller for the Garnet Valley School District, a graduate of Widener University in Chester, PA. He holds both a master's and bachelor's of science degrees in accounting. He has over 25 years of nonprofit experience and is familiar with clergy tax law with local churches in our conference. And so I'm going to ask James, just to get, before you get started, tell us one thing that would be fun that people don't know about you, James, and then I'm turning it over to you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. The one fun fact about me is I've lived in 7 homes in my life, and all 7 homes are situated in Delaware County, and I live about 7.5 miles from where I grew up. So, and I did all my schooling in Delaware County. I did all my schooling in Chester. So I'm a Delaware County guy. Born and raised, and I love this area, and I cannot even move out of it. I got close once, but the market wasn't right, and I ended up still in Delaware County. So that's the fun thing about me.
Well, thanks. I'm going to turn it over to you, James, and you can bring up the slide deck. Let us know if you have any problems with that, and we'll turn it over to you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So tonight I'm going to be talking about a church, local church, and things that need to happen when selling a parsonage. I know that George Monk's going to be speaking on rental a little later on, and there is one item I will mention that is outside of or specific to our rentals. I'll get into that a little later, but there is one insurance item specific to our rentals when we, if you decide to rent the parsonage. Why sell the parsonage? Well, local church cannot afford the maintenance expenses. The pastor owns a home. The pastor's part-time. Some of the things you want to look at when you are considering selling a parsonage is, what's the landscape for the local real estate market? Is there availability of homes if the local church needs to provide a parsonage in the future? What's the ability for the pastor to buy and sell a home in the area that you are? Are there some rental options in your community? And will your pastor live in the community? Some pros of selling a parsonage: you no longer have the maintenance expense. You have lower insurance costs, and they have no parsonage inspections required. Some of the cons are, you must maintain the capacity provided for parsonage in the future. You must provide a housing allowance. And again, there's no assurance that your pastor will be in the local community. When you're selling a parsonage, there's a little thing called the book of discipline that you have to follow. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 paragraphs in the book of discipline: 2540, 2541, 2542, and 2543. 2540 is the unincorporated local church property sales, includes churches, parsonages. 2541 is for the incorporated local church. 2542 is the disposition of and mortgage of churches and parsonages, and 2543 is restrictions on the proceeds from mortgage or sale. Paragraphs 2540 and 2541, if you're going to sell the parsonage, the local church must notify the district superintendent to set up the review by the district board of church location and set a date for a charge or church conference. Then you have to give at least 10 days notice before this scheduled charge or church conference from the pulpit and from at least one other source of communication, either your bulletin, newsletter, email, notice, bulletin board as well. And any two officers of the Board of Trustees are duly authorized to sign any necessary written documents to carry out the direction of the charge conference. And the signatures are binding on the local church. Paragraph 2554, the disposition of parsonage. The district superintendent must sign consent to the action taken by the church conference in order to release the property from the trust clause and provide clear title to the buyer of the property. Paragraph 2543, restrictions on the proceeds. They cannot be used for current operating expenses, including the housing allowance. They can be used for capital improvements only if adequate provisions have been made to meet the housing needs of the pastor, and that requires the consent of the district superintendent and the pastor. It can also be used for aid in construction of a new church, or can be used for congregational development if a 3 to 5 year plan is presented and approved by the annual conference. Any questions so far? Are you going?
Nothing yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, when you get ready to sell the parsonage, there's a few things you really want to take into consideration. Should you get should the church get an appraisal on the parsonage? Should you list the property yourself or hire a broker? Will you be making any of the necessary repairs or selling it as is? And what member of trustees will receive the office to communicate to the full board? And there's one item I actually forgot to put into this PowerPoint, and that is you want to contact your county board of deeds, county board of deeds, and get a copy of the deed and any liens that may be against your property. You want to do a title search on the property, to make sure you have clear title. And the buyers usually will perform a title search, but some of these title searches, and especially on the older churches, they do not go far enough back. So you may want to do a full title search.
James, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Somebody has a question regarding the restrictions on the use of the funds from the sales.
Okay.
Are you allowed to use the interest from proceeds to put towards housing allowance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you may be getting to this, but the next question is, what are the tax implications when selling?
Okay. Yes. Your tax implications when selling, and especially in the state of Pennsylvania, there more likely will be a transfer tax, which is 1% of the sale price, and the parsonage in the state of Pennsylvania is normally taxable already for property tax. There are some that if the parcel is the church and the parsonage, you may not pay currently. So if you if you're moving to a rental as well, then it could change your property tax. But most parsonages in the state of Pennsylvania are already have property tax. And then, once you have once you decide to sell and you have proceeds should be invested to maximize the return in support of the housing allowance, as that first question actually referenced. You want to formalize an investment policy. And then the next question you really have is, who's going to manage the funds? Will the local church manage the funds in-house or have an independent manager? Mid-Atlantic Foundation can assist you in development investment plan. It can also manage the investment of the proceeds from the sale of your parsonage. So, and any questions you have on the management of the funds can be directed to the Mid-Atlantic Foundation. And that is all I really had. Is there any other questions?
There is one that just came in, James. If
Sure.
the parsonage and the church share the same address, do you have to go to the county or other jurisdiction to separate the property into two plots?
If it is the same parcel, yes, you may have to do a subdivision in order to be able to sell it.
Okay.
And I did mention something about renting, and I know that George is going to talk about some of the rental things. But the one thing I did find out earlier today is when you're going to rent a parsonage, and all the churches in the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference are part of the mandatory insurance program for property liability, general liability, that there will be an increase of insurance for an item called lesser's risk. So that protects you, protects the church from anything that may go wrong with between a tenant and a landlord. And then for insurance of the building itself, the building is covered by the insurance, but if you rent that, then you would need to have the tenants would need to have renter's insurance for their contents. Any other questions?
Yeah, so there's another question. Would the church have to pay tax on any gain as an unrelated business income?
There is a possibility that you would have to pay tax on a rental, but on the sale of the property, no, you would not have to pay tax on the gain of on the sale.
Okay. There's a question here about managing funds, which I think Jack can answer. But before we go to that, there is a question. Define the interest earning versus market value on funds invested. Not quite sure. Does that make?
I think I understand that. That question comes up a lot. The historic way people invested was like in a fixed income instrument to be able to take interest income, and a bond would mature at the same value that you bought $1,000 bond that matured. That was a historic way of looking at it. Today, under UPMIFA, the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, and churches are institutions, allows for total return with a designation of saying we're going to spend a certain percentage. Say the range, according to UPMIFA, is 2% to 7% each year. So when we design these things, we certainly manage a lot of parsonage accounts from parsonages that have been sold. The objective is to try to earn a predictable amount of income stream through good times and bad, through good market cycles and bad market cycles, so the church can have a 2 to 3 year budget and look outward on what's predictable to earn from the interest and the total return. That kind of defines that. The other question that I saw would be, do you still need a panelist at the church? It could be the investment committee, it could be the trustee committee, but you are not removed totally of your obligation, even when you outsource the fiduciary piece to somebody like the Mid-Atlantic. Everybody's a fiduciary that's managing some entity's money, and in this case, you're the entity and you've got a group of people and you're all considered fiduciaries. You can offset that risk, you can send away some of that liability, but you still need to have internal functions and controls. So we do a lot of guidance sometimes about how to set these things up and who is on that committee and how frequently the reporting could be, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually.
Great. So the next question says, an earlier slide distinguished between incorporated and unincorporated churches. If the church is incorporated, but the parsonage was acquired prior, how does that affect the sale?
It does not really affect the sale. That is just the two paragraphs in the discipline that distinguish between the two churches, and it's for the entire denomination. So within the state of Pennsylvania, it does not, it will not affect the sale.
Okay, thank you. And then this, Debbie says, if you're a realtor and you want to help the church by selling it as a for sale by owner, and you're only acting as a church volunteer, I'm not sure if this is a question. Would it be okay with using an attorney to draw up the agreement of sale?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Debbie, if that
I
didn't
can
answer,
give
if that wasn't what
I
you were
can give
asking.
an example that the conference board of trustees has sold a few properties. There's a member of the trustees, I believe, who has some real estate experience, but the agreement of sale was written up by the chancellor. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember what we called him. The chancellor, and then yes, it saved the conference from paying the real estate fees.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. I've got one quick question for Steve Morton, since I didn't, and then we'll turn it over to George. Steve, and I know in Baltimore Washington Conference, they've now sold all of the district superintendent's parsonages. Do you know if that's the same thing in EPA, or what's the standard there now?
I can answer that, Frank.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's no parsonages in Eastern PA. We sold our last one in December. I'm sorry. The district superintendent moved out in December of 19. We sold it in 2020.
Okay.
We sold our last parsonage.
Well, that's great. We're going to ask all the panel. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Frank, I do want to make a comment. James was good in pointing us to the paragraphs in the discipline that gives some guidelines and restrictions. I would remind folks, and I find that local churches don't know this, we have parsonage guidelines that are listed in our conference journal annually. And so if you will look in the back of the journal, specifically the conversation that we're having tonight, if you have the 2020 journal, sale or rental of parsonage and use of proceeds, it's delineated pretty specifically. And again, I find that a lot of congregations are just not aware. So you want to make sure you've checked in that resource as well as what the Book of Discipline specifically says.
That's awesome. That's great. Yep. Ask for help. Do it right. That's why you're watching in tonight. And you'll get a chance to continue to ask questions to everybody, but I'm going to let George Monk jump in right now.
Yeah, Frank, I'm sorry. Can I jump in just for a second?
Sure.
There's
Please
one
do.
question that Jack can take to clarify what he talked about with the use of the proceeds. Jack, can you take that?
Oh, yeah. People, you can't earn interest and spend 2 to 7% above that. 2 to 7% of the proceeds is what's considered sustainable to not violate the principal over time. So it's invested in a way with a foundation. When we get a rate of return and we're looking at a 3-year rolling average, I don't want to go into endowments tonight or other things, but there's a control feature on that. We try to invest with predictable income over time. The predictable income is a range of 2 to 7% with a sustainability of 4.5% to 5% of the proceeds from the sale. And that makes everybody happy because it does not matter whether the market had a great year like last year. I mean, we were up 58% in a 12-month period on our equities. Please do not quote that tonight and say, Jack said we'd be able to get 58%. I don't know as I'll see a market like that again in my lifetime. I'm glad I saw it last year. But we do know over time our processes, the design, the way we manage funds is for that predictability. We only manage money for churches. All of our parsonages are pretty much invested the same way. And so the assurance is you don't need to become the investment committee for the church or the investment club of the church. Instead, it's done with a missional purpose of saying, foundation, earn us this range of money so that we can hedge inflation over time and predict our budget and know that we're going to offset that with the proceeds from the parsonage sale with a great degree of reliability. So that's the 2 to 7%. It's designed by powers greater than me, Uniform Prudent Investment Act. A lot more detail for that. Tune in for an endowment seminar coming to your home soon in a webinar.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. George, I'm going to turn it over to you. George actually has been successful in renting out their parsonage and wanted to use him as an example. So George, can you bring up the slide deck or you want Annabelle to do it?
I'll do it. Just before we start, I'd like to say good evening, everybody, and I'm glad you are participating in this webinar. I've done a lot of Zoom, but I have never done webinars until recently. It's quite a new experience. James said that he had lived in 7 houses. Okay, I just would like to say I've purchased 5 houses. I left this area. This is my home in Chevy Chase. Born and bred, raised, baptized, confirmed at Chevy Chase United Methodist. I left to go to college, didn't come back until 2002 into the home I grew up in, which is about 15 minutes from the church here. So I have a lot of longevity, and I think possibly because I own 5 homes from North Carolina to New Jersey, that perhaps it helped me be the parsonage manager. I'd like to give you a little bit of predicate on this. In June of 2013, we found out a pastor coming in had purchased a home, and he had looked at the parsonage, and they decided to purchase the home. They weren't going to move into the way the existing parsonage was. As a trustee, I raised my hand and I said, after I took an estimate, I said, I need $17,000 to refurbish it, paint it, fix the cracks, put in a new rug in the sunroom, and a few other things just to make it more attractive. I did use a realtor in the church who was able to go out and advertise for renting, and also, more importantly, to vet people who were interested in renting. Vetting is very important because you want to be able to rent to somebody who can afford whatever rent you're talking about, because you need that rent month by month by month. Since that time, since January 2014, to the present date through May, we've received $308,000 for rent. that has been very helpful year by year it's about $42,000 a year to help our total operating expenses. Before we get into this, I would like you to consider this. Part of the responsibility that we discussed, to be responsible, we needed over time to take some money from the rent and put it in a separate bank account to build a bank account for emergency repairs no more than $10,000. And that has been very helpful when we had to replace a boiler unexpectedly that cost $8,100. We also budget annually approximately $10,000 for ordinary repairs in the parsonage. So they're not, the parsonage expenses and revenue are separate from the total operating revenue of or the operating expenses of the, they're not blurred, they're segregated. And now I'm going to start, we'll try to share the screen. So the idea is that we refurbished the parsonage, but then where do we go from there? There's some things you need to consider. And Annabelle, can we get the big piece up here? So basically, the house was refurbished and ready to be rented in September, October timeframe. But we put it up on the market. It took about 2 months, and we had a family that wanted to rent the house. But before that, you have to determine what is the rent in your community. Ours was X. In your communities, depending on where you are, you want a realtor who does rentals to tell you how much you should be able to get for your parsonage. Once you have that, you want to know, will it cover property taxes? Will it cover the pastor's housing allowance, and any other costs? Along the way, there are expenses that you do incur either one time to begin with or on a recurring basis. If you're refurbishing and renting for the first time, you probably want to paint the inside and have the painters fix all the cracks and bring it up to standards. And by the way, one of the things that's very important is that you're going to have a lead test done to meet the regulations. So the painters, particularly on the windowsills or behind radiators, have to paint or remove excess or old paint so you have a current, clean windowsill and other areas that will be inspected, because the inspections are not just visible, they're swipes that are sent away for lab testing. We refurbished the floor. That was something that the painter suggested. Ongoing expenses are appliances. We've replaced over time not only the boiler, but the refrigerator, the washer, the dryer, and the dishwasher. But they haven't been all at once. They were as they came up or began to malfunction. When you set up a house for rent, you'll be inspected, and you're going to have fire detectors, CO2 detectors, and they want you to, by code in Montgomery County, Maryland, you have to put in 2 fire extinguishers. So all that's good. It's not very expensive, but it has to be done, and it's prudent.
George, is radon testing part of that too?
No, not down here. In renting the parsonage, that's kind of like the beginning. You have to have and again, well, there are a lot of similarities between Pennsylvania and Maryland. There's some differences, small differences, but generally, I'm sure they follow the same things. We have to have a rental housing license. We have to update that every year. A lead paint inspection with updates to the county and the states are done whenever the renter changes. If a renter leaves and you have a new renter, you have to have a brand new lead paint inspection. And we get back to the property tax assessment. Our property, our parsonage, is on one of 3 parcels that the whole church is on that have been tax exempt. Unfortunately, it's on the largest parcel, 15,700 square feet. So before we were able to rent it, it took us 6 months to work with the county and the state tax assessors to have it come in at 6,400 square feet, because it's really a postage stamp. Otherwise, we would have been paying $10,500 a year in property taxes. We're now paying about $5,400 in property taxes. But understanding the deed and having an assessment before you do it to understand what your property taxes are going to be is very important. And that doesn't happen overnight. You just don't go into the county offices and say, this is what we're doing. What's the new assessment? It takes time. It takes argument. But it's a healthy exercise. The church insurance that we have is with Brotherhood. It covers it does cover the parsonage structure. However, we insist, and as part of the rental agreement, that the renter has to provide their own insurance for their household goods. So I'm going to go with this one. Work with a realtor who has an agreement and will help find renters. We're lucky we have a realtor with a firm. They do rentals, and they mostly sell homes, but they certainly do rentals today too. They have the agreement, and it's a good agreement, and it covers virtually everything. They'll also advertising. Normally, if it's a reputable realtor in your own congregation, they may cut you some slack. Maybe they'll charge you a nominal fee. Maybe they won't charge you anything. But once they do it and get the renters, then it's between the person who's designated at the church and who deals with the renters on an ongoing basis for maintenance and so on. Normally a small fee. The lease should be for 2 months' notice by either the church or the renter. Even though the renter may start in December, we all know that pastors are start new churches on July 1st. So we try to work that in so that at least in the first year, if it's an odd, the renter will understand that on May 1st, between May 1st and July 1st, decisions are going to be made that may carry forward. In any event, we'd like to get it to go from July 1st to July 1st, and then with a 2-month consideration, which would be notification on May 1st to do that. Other considerations would be, will you allow smoking? If smokers are in the house, you're definitely going to have to paint the inside of the house if you're going to rent it again. Will you allow dogs and cats? We do. The first renter came in with 2 dogs, and I was so thrilled that we actually had a bite of people that wanted to rent it. I said, of course, they were small dogs, but we have only one wall-to-wall carpet, and that's in the sunroom. And we replaced that when that renter left. We replaced that. Most of the floors are hardwood, and most of the renters that we've had, 2 families, bring their own rugs, which are generally very nice rugs for the living room and the dining room and so on. An escrow account must be set up with your bank for 1 month's rent. So you have to have authorized signatures that the trustees, of course, and the chair of finance will work with. But if everything is fine, when the renter leaves, the renter will receive that deposit back with the interest earned. Well, the interest is earning like 6 cents a month. So it's not like it was 10 years ago when you could get some considerable money back. And I think that's generally it. And I appreciate the time you spent looking at this. Renting the parsonage has been successful for us. It may be for other churches as well, but again, it's worthwhile to take a look. And if you have any questions, we're happy to address them and talk through it with you.
One question that came up, George, Lori says, in my church's case, as they are given an equitable contribution by the church, I understand they may not use rental funds for housing allowance. Can you tell me in this case where they may put those rental funds?
Well, okay, good question. What we do is we are paid our rent at the beginning of the month, and we book it to operational revenue under parsonage. We have separate a separate budget for the pastor called housing allowance. That's out of the general revenue that we receive. So it's not broken down. It's not a 1-for-1. It's just part of our expenses. I guess the point is, you want, in assessing this, you want to get a good estimate as what your total rent is going to be. Will it cover property taxes? Will it cover housing allowance? And if it may not cover all of it, it may cover a satisfactory portion of it. But it's not a one for one. We're not paying the housing allowance out of our parsonage rent.
Great, thanks. Bob has a question, and it says, is the parsonage now a business for tax purposes?
No, I think it becomes reportable if these kinds of revenues exceed a certain percent. And I don't know what the percent is, but we're not anywhere close. Because you have preschool, you have parsonage rent, but and James, you may know this better than I do, but it has to exceed like 25 or 30% of your operational revenue before it becomes taxable, or people will look at it that way.
Okay.
All I know is we're not close to it.
Great. Len has a question. If we do decide to rent, who is our best contact for guidance on handling the monetary setup?
Your chair of finance or your financial secretary. The trustees have to approve a brand new bank relationship. They approve the authorized signers, and those people will set up a bank account at probably the bank where you have your operational account. And I again recommend electronic banking, so you can take a look at all your accounts at any time you want for control purposes. But the idea is that the escrow account is separate, it's segregated, it's going to sit there, and that's what you want to make sure happens. Nobody's moving monies in and out of the escrow account. Banks also have a separate agreement for escrow accounts.
Great, thank you. I don't see any more questions at this time. Frank.
Right, Jack, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, we've been doing this for quite a while. Any thoughts in particular you want to pass on to the group here?
Well, I really think there's so much interest. Last night we discussed about cemeteries, and we had a discussion about that. This is about parsonages, and we have a constant flow of people that are interested in endowments and legacy giving. How do you stimulate legacy giving in your church? We are a resource for all churches, whether you've invested with us or not, as this seminar is open to everybody. It's funded because of churches that do invest with us as a nonprofit. We charge a small fee, and that helps our ministry. We're a ministry just like you are. Our board is made up of great folks that are God-serving folks that have volunteered. We don't have a paid board. And I think as we go forward, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the denomination as we go forward, but money and division of properties and sales of churches and parsonages and all these things, they're logical discussions to have. And you need to know qualifications about what you can and can't do. The Book of Discipline is the guide. We all understand that. We function within the Book of Discipline. From there, your conduit is somebody like James, the conference treasurer, Steve Morton, the district superintendent, and all the other district superintendents. Yes, we love all the district superintendents. I did see that comment. And I think what we've found is education is the best opportunity, because we're not, any of us that are serving on these committees and boards are not trained to do that. We're volunteering to do that. And part of the volunteer experience is learning. I think we're lifelong learners when it comes to that. So I think we're blessed to be able to have the resources. With the Mid-Atlantic, we cover 3 annual conferences. We cover 16 different districts. We have so many people, 200 pastors that have come through our Advanced Financial Leadership Academy and financial leadership knowledge. What we're trying to do is understand that the church is in the business of making disciples, but there is a business aspect to the church. And if you run afoul, it's no longer in the church's hands. It's community and it's local laws and taxes. And these are the questions that people ask. division of a parsonage, we did find one time where they wanted to divide the parsonage. It was in a more rural area, but the lot minimum was 7 or 8 acres. And so that, without zoning board approval, and you could go and apply for a variance, but who wanders through that? How do you go through that process? Because we've had that experience with somebody, we connect people with that as to what was their challenges, and then of course what was the outcome, and how do you get to and move forward with a plan. So please understand, use our website, our resources. This presentation can go out to other people. It's up on our website. We will have a video, the video capabilities, and Annabelle can also distribute this as our coordinator of support services. We value your time. You've invested a lot in it. We know there's going to be more questions are going to come back as you share with other people. Send them to us. That's why we're here. We're a ministry and we're a resource available to everybody.
There is one question that just came in also regarding the rent. Is it okay, a question from David, for our property manager to hold the first month in escrow rather than the church?
Yes. And we had a decision to make, and as a financial secretary, and also as the parsonage manager, it was, to me, it was more advantageous to have that under my control and not under a property manager who might be halfway across the DC area and not able to respond quickly to make a quick repair. Plumbing, toilet needs repair. We have control of all that in the church, and we just have good relationships where we can react quickly as opposed to a property manager. And that's, again, that was our own opinion here, which we followed through with. But a property manager can certainly do the same job that I'm doing as parsonage manager. It's a matter of your culture, I think, and how close you want to be to the renter. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, I suspect James may be able to answer this. What is the range of housing allowance? I guess so you know how much you have to have available.
I saw that question and I started to look up the actual answer because I was reading it earlier today. And it is the lower of 2 numbers, and if just give me 30 seconds, I will have that for you.
All right, talk amongst yourselves.
Well, Jack, he's taking 30 seconds. There's one more aspect of a property manager. Property manager normally charges 8% of the rent. And in my 4th year of managing a property and getting another phone call at 10 o'clock at night, I said to the pastor, I want out. But what they did, and I said, but I have a solution. Give me 8% in addition of the, and I'll continue to do this. Otherwise, get someone, who does this professionally. And again, it may sound kind of like cold-hearted, but fair's fair. And I've been there at 10 o'clock at night in zero weather, moving them to a hotel because a boiler went down. And likewise on Saturdays, and sometimes you get a phone call at 6 o'clock at night, and because something's happening around the property. And that's just some thoughts. And it's so there is a cost to a property manager, roughly 8%.
Yeah, what we found with people is money cannot be the only decision about why you rent the parsonage. It's the impact on the neighborhood, and how do other people within that neighborhood, how would they view a rent in a home owned area and so on, or is it other things? That's where, again, as I said, the dynamic aspect of it is there's lots of considerations to these, and it can't just be saying, well, we could get X number of dollars in rent and somebody pulls that out. You really do need to survey it. You need to plan it. You need to prepare for it, and then execute it. It's not something that happens quickly. I will say that in my experience, most people are disappointed on how long it took to do that. And then also, if a tenant moves out, how long it can take to get a new tenant in as well. And you might have been counting on that income stream. So don't anticipate that, oh, you're going to rent and have 12 months of income. if somebody was to move out, and then you have to go and find a new tenant.
Just quickly, we budget revenue for 10 months, just in case somebody leaves.
My point. Yes, exactly. I think that, these best practices, we do a lot around church best practices and business best practices. We don't want to default to the highest. We want to default to how can we sustain. When we budget the foundation annually, we try to guesstimate, and then we really try to live within that budget and within the room to be able to have something happen that we would not be able to predict, and that's reserves. And sometimes you have to have a reserve against that as well. James may have come up with the answer by now.
I did. Thank you.
Ding, 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 ding.
And this
That was the ding. That was the ding I heard.
and I'm going to go back to what Reverend Steve Morton said earlier. Some of these things are actually in our own documents and in the journal itself. We talk about establishing the housing allowance, and a housing allowance shall include the lesser of the amount necessary to rent or lease housing in the ministry area of the local church, or the actual cost of housing, rent or mortgage, and also should include an amount sufficient to provide the utilities required by the EPA housing guidelines and standards, including gas, electric, fuel, water, telephone, internet, things like that.
Thank you.
It's basically the fair market value of where they're located.
But that housing allowance piece of compensation, to be clear, when you get a new pastor, that is something that is negotiated with the superintendent, and frankly set up by the
Correct.
superintendent
That is correct.
with the staff parish relations team and the incoming pastor, at least to launch, a new appointment. That's where that happens.
Yes, that's correct, and that's where you get that's a good range to start with, and it can be negotiated up, down, but yes.
Great. Thank you so much. James, George, thank you so much. Jack, thank you for jumping in with some good thoughts also too. I'm gonna let Reverend Steve Morton close this out for the evening, and thank you all for your time and effort tonight and for your efforts for the kingdom.